This is a question which you may not hear at hustings that are not at a synagogue, or you've seen, although you may have done before. So, Jonathan, I'm going to start off with you. This comes from Daniel Hennigan-Bacon. They ask, why have the British parties lost their love and empathy for Israel?
I think Israel is to some extent a victim of its own success. Partly there was love of support for the underdog. And partly when we heard talk from lots of people last summer about Israel acting disproportionately, one considered what Israel did with its resources. I was in Sderot in January. Israel spent billions on its Iron Dome missile system, on shelters for its population. Hamas, on the other hand, used the concrete that was made available to it to build tunnels and located missiles in mosques and hospitals. Small wonder then that sadly, when Israel took action that inevitably had to be taken, because who wouldn't take action with missiles raining down on it, the body count was unequal. And that led people to make comments about disproportionate. But actually, largely, I think, a result of Israel's own success. This country has a great British value of supporting the underdog. And I'm pleased to say Israel is no longer the underdog.
I think that on the day of Yom HaShoah, we don't need any reminder of the case for Israel. For those who don't know, Yom HaShoah is the Jewish day of remembering the Holocaust. And it was out of the Holocaust, of course, that the state of Israel was born. But I think part of that ambivalence, that growing ambivalence, which we must all acknowledge exists in our political culture, I think some of it arises from the sense of frustration at the lack of progress towards a two-state solution. I remember as a girl that amazing image of Yitzhak Rabin shaking hands with Yasser Arafat on the lawn of the White House. And since that day, very little progress has been made towards what I think we all want to see, two states for two peoples. And I think that if we are going to have a secure, prosperous and flourishing Israel, then yes, those friends of Israel, of which of course I am one, we need to make the case for it. But we also need to make the case and support those moderate voices who would work towards that peaceful solution.
I'm unashamedly a friend of Israel and a supporter of the Jewish community. I remember backpacking in Israel when I was young. It was one of the most wonderful holidays I've ever had, travelling all around, going through the West Bank. It was the start of the first Intifada, and we actually got attacked on the bus. It was all quite exciting, nobody got hurt. But I'm a complete supporter of the State of Israel. The reason there has been a change is there has been a fundamental shift in the politic against Israel in our society. It's absolutely clear. And there are two prime causes, in my opinion. One is that we now have so much influence from the European Union. The European Union is fundamentally a socialist organisation. There's an index called the ADL Global Index, which measures levels of anti-Semitism around the world. It's a Jewish institution. You can look it up online. The index for Britain is 8%. If you look at the index for European countries, it's vastly higher in almost every single European country. The influence of the EU on us is huge. Also, we have invited millions of people who come from even more hostile countries to come and live in our country. So is it surprising that levels of anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli feeling has risen?
Anti-Semitism is coming from your left and mine. We will have the opportunity for open questions later.
The question was why our party has lost the love for Israel. Well, I can tell you my party hasn't lost the love for Israel. And that's why I resigned my government position so I could vote against a motion sponsored by Labour MPs in the House of Commons on a premature recognition of State of Palestine. And that's why I support the two-state solution, but peace comes through strength, not by capitulation. And that is why David Cameron has been remarkably resolute, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Israeli people and the Israeli government. It's only a Prime Minister that has to send his own troops into war knows how another Prime Minister has to react when defending his own people from missiles on a daily basis. I can only tell you, I can't answer for the other parties, but my party still loves Israel, and I continue to stand side by side with my Israeli friends.
I would like to say I don't think we have lost our love for Israel. I certainly haven't. The people I speak to certainly haven't. And I hope that when a certain action is criticised, in the same way we criticise Tony Blair, we criticise ourselves too. I think we do that in this country. And I think we mustn't feel that love for us has been lost when we look at ourselves objectively and decide on these things. First of all, I say I hope you don't feel we've lost that love for Israel. Now, I grew up in Northern Ireland. I was born in Belfast. I think one lucky and unlucky thing we have in this country, we have a very long history of understanding how to deal with troubled areas, how to deal with terrorism. We know it's complex. We don't want simplistic answers. This is why when I discuss this with my party, I don't want these simplistic answers like boycotting, pushing a two-state solution. A lot of it has to be decided by the people in those countries, but please don't feel